All right. Welcome to Problem Solver Politics. It is 7:06 on a Sunday, and I'm your host, Cardon Ellis. We are live in the KHTS studio. The show is Problem Solver Politics, and I am with my co-host, Mark Murphy.
Who is trying to restore a little civility to this political conversation.
And usually we have news, usually have a bunch of other little fun gabs and little gimmicks that we do at the beginning of the show.
But there is nothing going on in Washington right now, Barrett.
No, actually, there's a ton going on in Washington, but we are going to backload all of that to the end of the show because we have got an extraordinary guest on today. His name is Philip K. Howard, and he has the audacity, he has the wherewithal to write a book called Try Common Sense, replacing the failed ideologies of right and left. And he's actually joining us on the show today, so we're going to have a little talk with him today about his book. Philip, can you hear us, man?
Good evening, Cardon. Hi, Mark.
Hey, what's going on? So, Philip, I have to tell you, we're super excited to talk with you, and something interesting happened when we booked you with your publicist for the show. There's a little bit of a generation gap between me and Mark, I must confess.
Try about 4 decades.
Yeah, those of us that are watching on the Facebook live feed will notice I got my hip laptop with all this cool Mac stuff going on, and he's actually got 4 newspapers with recent articles he wants to talk with Philip about infrastructure on. So there's like this total, print versus digital media age difference that's visible on our live feed. But what's hilarious is despite having Dave Rubin on, the Faction 1776, Brian Kaplan in recent shows, my buddy Mark, my co-host here, comes in, and you are the most excited guest he's been for this year so far, Philip. He's like, Philip K. Howard? Oh, I know that guy. This is great.
First, I'm a fan of The Daily Show, but that should explain some of the background. But anybody writes a book called Life Without Lawyers and is a lawyer and, one of the senior partners of a firm, has got my interest. And your work on infrastructure, it is awesome. You've hit some of the key points that I wish us Democrats and Republicans could find a way to come to common terms on. So this should be fun.
Yeah. So, Philip, really fast to start out, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I guess whatever your self-identified bio is, so my listeners can kind of get to know you, and just tell us who you are and what you're working on.
I'm out of jail. I'm on parole. Good behavior, all that kind of stuff. I'm a sort of a civic leader who was converted into a national sort of civic leader. And so I've advised each of the last 4 presidents. And I wrote this new book, Try Common Sense, because after Trump got elected, I didn't support Trump because I know Trump. And
well, you were part of his transition team. I mean,
yeah. Well, no, I was not part of the transition team, but I was on his CEO council.
That's true. Yes. Okay.
Because they think I'm considered an infrastructure expert. So I was, I thought, okay, he got elected. I'll go down and help try to rebuild America's decrepit infrastructure. So I go down there, and I'm testifying before Congress every other month and working with leaders of both parties. They both say they want to rebuild the infrastructure. And at the end of the year, this first year is from now, or the end of 2017, the deal is completely obvious. The Democrats agree to streamline the permitting so you don't have 10 years of red tape. It's really stupid. You do your environmental review in a year, and you settle on the permits, and then you make a decision. And in exchange for that, the Republicans agree to fund the infrastructure because infrastructure, shockingly, does not grow on trees. You actually have to pay for it. And that requires either finding the money somewhere, probably raising the gas tax or finding some other revenue source.
And I understand President Trump even said, I'm willing to raise the gas tax, the federal gas tax, which hasn't been raised since, 93?
Yeah. So in any event, at the end of the year, it was completely apparent that notwithstanding what the leaders of both parties were saying, they had no intention of doing either one of those things because neither party wanted to give a win to the other party. They'd rather continue to point fingers and blame each other for the failure. So I said, well, to hell with that. These people are hopeless. They're never going to fix anything. The culture in Washington is toxic. I'm going to write a book that attacks everyone I can think of in Washington and explains why it can never do anything, and by the way, also why it's kind of suffocating Americans in their daily lives. You know, you can't make a bad joke in the workplace without getting fired, and you know, doctors and nurses spend half the day filling out forms nobody reads and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I did. I wrote this book, and it just came out, and it attacks everybody.
Well, I do want to point out, though, that you truly are an infrastructure expert. And you have, and as a legal expert, you are trying to provide a creative way to expedite the process to try and address this $5+ trillion problem that we have. And you actually had ideas that would work, some of which they were adopted, but more importantly, you had a methodology that says, let's get these guys together and we can solve this.
And this actually affects us here because we had Steve Knight, our congressman, on 5 or 6 months ago, and he had just scored, how much was that? From Mitch McConnell and the Trump administration for the 5 and the 14 split?
Yeah, he had $45 million, which is a pittance, but when you add that to the California money and other monies, it actually meant we were going to get carpool lanes on the 14 and the 5. But he did explain the challenges he was up against, both in terms of time to get the projects done and all the paperwork, but also the very fact that it wasn't politically a positive because it wasn't shovel ready.
Right.
I haven't met an infrastructure project
Yeah.
that's shovel ready. What are we talking about?
I mean,
Kmart parking lot?
Yeah. I mean, just to put this in perspective, in 2009, President Obama had $800 billion from Congress as stimulus, and a lot of that money was allocated to fix America's infrastructure. And 5 years later, they gave a report on how they'd spent the money. Something like 3% had been spent on transportation infrastructure because even the president didn't have the authority to give a permit. I mean, it's literally absurd. By contrast, in 1956, the Interstate Highway Act was passed. It was 29 pages long. Within 10 years, over 20,000 miles had been built. Today, the last transportation bill was 500 pages long. There were thousands of pages more of regulations, and it would take a decade just to get permission to build a couple of miles. So we've reached this point. Let's pause for a second, where I argue in the book you can't actually repair Washington, that the bureaucracy is so dense that no one can make a decision. And so the only way to fix this, and I have a lot of smart people on my side of this, is you have to actually reboot the system. Not to, quote, deregulate, not to get rid of legitimate oversight. You want to make sure you're not building a highway through the virgin forest or whatever. But you need to reboot the system so that people can take responsibility again.
Okay, I'm really curious. I'm so curious to see what you think this reboot is, because I get so frustrated. I often have said on this radio show that I just turn more and more libertarian every year because I see government not helping. In California, we are dying of hyper-regulation. We have such a homelessness problem, and these people aren't your typical mentally ill, I can't hold a job, and I'm hearing voices in the hearing voices in my head stereotype that we think of sometimes. These are women with full-time jobs whose husbands died, and the $3,000, $4,000 a month that they're making in their full-time position isn't enough for the rent now, and the rent is so high because they never give permits for anything. So the few houses that exist, now the rents are skyrocketing to $3,000, $4,000 a month now. So they burn through their savings, they live in their cars for a couple of months, and as soon as it gets too cold for them and their kids to sleep in there, they show up here at the shelters, with this family dumped in your lap, and your heart breaks. So I view this, and I think we got to deregulate. We have so much hyper-regulation. Even if we deregulated 30%, we'd still be over-regulated. If you don't think deregulation is the key, what is this reboot besides like Civil War or the articles of the Constitution where the state convention happens again and we just reboot the Constitution? What's the reboot?
Okay, so first, let's just stipulate that almost every government program is broken. It's broken not because they address the wrong points, I believe, but because nobody goes back and fixes them. So that if you have zoning laws that are so restrictive that you can't build new housing, the problem there is not to just deregulate and get rid of all zoning, is to make regulation more permissible and to have the permitting process, take place in months rather than years. So with infrastructure, I proposed, or I have a not-for-profit called commongood.org. People can sign up for free, get on board, commongood.org. We came up with a proposed streamlining of the permitting for infrastructure that was amendments to federal law. The total proposal is less than 3 pages long. Governing isn't this hard. It created clear lines of authority to make decisions when there are disagreements, and then somebody else has authority to oversee the decision. That's kind of how democracy is supposed to work. But instead, we have 1,000-page rule books that don't let anybody, even the president, in the case of Obama and the infrastructure, make a decision. So I don't think that the answer is deregulation in most cases, although there are a lot of stupid programs. I think the answer is actually restoring human responsibility and making regulation into much simpler, goal-oriented structures.
You know what this reminds me of?
People can get something done.
You're pointing to a target. I don't think many people recognize the when I say $5 trillion in infrastructure losses, we're talking about 2/3 of our schools are in portable buildings. We know the road system has collapsed. We know that the amount of roads that need to be repaired, according to the National American Society of Civil Engineers, is horrific in terms of the percentages, how many bridges are collapsing, et cetera, let alone our electric grid. We face a major challenge that must be repaired. But you know what this sounds like? This sounds like the beginning of World War II, where we cut through a lot of tape and we set up some variety of committees and individuals that we pulled out of the major corporations, and they went to war to mobilize America's infrastructure to transform the entire system of how we got things moved, the factories, to make things happen. And the same thing, of course, you've already pointed out about President Eisenhower and the Democratic administration that he had to work with, actually pulled off a miracle with our national highway system.
Right. If you find anything that works, any public school, any public agency, and there are a lot that work, you will find people that go to work not with their noses in rule books, but actually rolling up their sleeves and making decisions based on what seems practical and fair. And often, in fact, there are studies of this, ignoring the rules. So what's happened in Washington, which is like this alien universe, where no one is actually close to anyone on the ground doing something, the tentacles go out into the world, into Southern California, into everywhere. With all these rules, it made sense to somebody looking in front of a computer screen on Constitution Avenue, but actually don't make any sense on the ground. And it's that drives people to vote for Donald Trump, that sense of, kind of big brother breathing down people's necks. And it also makes it so that nothing works very well. So that's why I think, as you're just saying, going into World War II, we need to adopt exactly that attitude and say, look, we don't want to get rid of government. Every Republican since Reagan has said we're going to deregulate. It hasn't happened. Government's gotten twice as big. Why is that? Because people want clean water. They want, somebody to make sure the toys don't have lead paint on them. But we don't need 4,000 rules telling people how to design their workplace for worker safety. It doesn't work. It's better to look for unsafe workplaces than to tell people exactly how many inches above the counter the electric plug has to be.
So I got a quick question for you. This is all music to my ears, and I really wish I really wish more people were saying this. Actually, no, I got two questions now. This is, of course, music to all of my libertarian friends' ears, and the SCV libertarians, I'm sure, are loving the sound of this. Where does this put you amongst the New York elite of authors that are opining on the philosophical battlefield in this war of ideas. Because, like,
he's a Democrat, can't you tell?
Yeah, I saw,
because he's pragmatic and he's practical.
Yeah, but
he's not listening to the left.
Yeah, but he's literally making a limited government argument here, while simultaneously saying I don't support Trump because I know Trump, while then making a wildly libertarian accusation of basically government in general. But you're obviously so articulate, much like my co-host Mark Murphy. I can see why he suspects you're a Democrat. You know. Meanwhile, Jonathan Haidt is giving this massively glowing review of your book. Like, I have found, I hate labels, you know, but unfortunately they're a necessary part of our universe. Like, how do you self-identify on this wild spectrum nowadays?
You know, I believe in people. I believe in common sense. So I'm a registered independent. I've advised presidents from both parties, so I'm pretty androgynous. I attack certain absolutist ideologies of both parties. Just take the left, for example. You can't govern a country by looking at everything as individual rights. The rights our framers gave us were protections against state power, you know, barging into our house and throwing us in jail or something. The new rights are people pounding the table saying, give me something for myself. So all it does is polarize people. So that's the left. Now, on the right, you've got people saying, let's get rid of government. You know, it's either deregulate everything and no new taxes, right? So,
well, dude, we're dying at 54.3% here if you make over $250,000 in California. I mean,
and if you've ever met anybody in the upper bracket that actually pays more than 20%. But anyway,
But you know something? Government, the Republicans are right that government is incredibly wasteful. But the Republicans in Congress, they keep saying that they want to curb regulation. Then you look at their laws, they make it impossible to write a new regulation, but they're doing nothing to the junk pile of 50 years of regulations that are wasting this money. We're spending, try this new book, Try Common Sense. At one point in the book, I'm talking about the dysfunction of Congress. I did an analysis of the top 10 broken programs. You know, it's the programs that everybody knows are broken. And how much do they cost? They cost about $900 billion a year.
Which is really actually a pittance in the government budget side.
Well, it's not a pittance. It's about, you know, it's like a quarter of the budget. So $900 billion. You can cover a lot of sins with $900 billion. You can cut a lot of taxes. You can provide, you can help with global warming. You know, there are all kinds of things you can do with $900 billion.
Well, you could almost cover most of the $1.5 trillion deficit that came out of the tax cut that we just got.
Yeah, exactly.
That benefited the major corporations.
And so,
the top
so one of the points I make in this book is that, forget about policies for a second. We need to start analyzing government, modern government, in moral terms. Mm-hmm. It is immoral to waste $900 billion. It is immoral, in my judgment, for Republicans to say no new taxes on the one hand and not have a constructive idea about how we reduce health care costs or Social Security costs. Because all that means is if you add no new taxes plus unaffordable health care and Social Security, that equals our children paying for our bills today.
Yeah.
That's immoral. We can't do that. I mean, who are we to make our children pay for the fact that we don't have the discipline to fix our own program?
You're not supposed to tell Cardon this. He doesn't know he's going to be paying for us. He just thinks it's a myth.
I know. My generation's going to work till we die. All right, so right now we're going to take a brief commercial break, but just so everybody knows before we go, we're on the line right now with Philip K. Howard. He spells it kind of gangsta with a P-H-I-L, just one L, K. Howard, and the book is Try Common Sense. We're going to be back in 2 minutes. Before we go, though, we do have an announcement that unfortunately the Grapevine, the 5 freeway, is shut down in both directions north of Castaic, and traffic is being diverted off the freeway according to CHP, and the duration of the closure is unknown at this time. So if you're stuck in traffic on the Grapevine, people, just hang out because we got a really intelligent guy named Philip Howard on the line who's going to tell us more how to eschew the old ideologies of right and left. This is Problem Solver Politics. It is 7:26.
Little Eye Leaders is the newest preschool in the Santa Clarita Valley. At Little Eye Leaders, our outstanding teachers lead with intellect, perspective, and heart. That means our programs provide a warm, nurturing atmosphere to meet the unique needs of each child. We believe that play is a powerful form of learning for young children. That's why our kids have every opportunity to learn through the magic and excitement of play. Parents, schedule a tour today by calling 303-0400 or online at littleeyeleaders.org.
It's Consumers Furniture's President's Day sale. We are Santa Clarita's largest furniture store, and this weekend everything is 25% off our already low prices or finance for 24 months interest-free. All bedrooms, dining rooms, living rooms, and more is 25% off. Come in and see all the new merchandise and special floor sample closeouts we have for our largest sale of the year. Consumers Furniture is located in the Center Point Shopping Center below Sam's Club and Walmart.
Hometown.
I wanted to let you know that I really appreciate the way you guys do what you do.
Your hometown station.
All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardon Ellis, with
Mark Murphy, attempting to continue to restore civility to the political conversation. And our guest today, he definitely is a guy who's worked both sides of the party. He's had a chance to advise presidents on both sides for many different years. And he's written a lot of books that I find highly entertaining and enjoyable. You got to try him out whatever size you're on, including his top new one, Try Common Sense, but also go back and check out his books on infrastructure and Life Without Lawyers.
So his name is Philip K. Howard. We're talking about Trying Common Sense. We're on the line with Philip now, and we're going to continue the conversation that we left off on before we went on to the commercial break. But I do have a question before we continue with that. I noticed the subtitle, the subline, gosh, I don't know what it's called, but you said Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of Right and Left. It's interesting that you frame that in terms of ideologies being the problem. How is it, I guess just expand upon that subline and how you think it's the ideologies that are affecting us.
Okay, well, I just mentioned why the liberal insistence on looking at everything as rights doesn't work. It just becomes selfishness, give me my rights. And the right-wing insistence on deregulation without distinguishing between what's effective and what's not. But the one place where both parties agree is that anything that government does, it must be done with strict controls, because the left wing wants to put rigid legal shackles on some sleazy businessman, right? And the right wing is scared to death of some run-amok official, so they want to put tight legal shackles on the official. And the result is that only in the last 50 years, we've created this code that makes central planning look efficient. It's 150 million words of binding federal law and regulation. There'll be 1,000 rules for nursing homes that tell you how many peas to serve people at night and how many pictures on the wall.
We should remind everybody, central planning was Stalin's great approach to the success of a certain...
Except that at least the central planners in the Soviet Union got together every 5 years to come up with another stupid plan that didn't work. We write these laws and the regulations in the 1970s, and then the people die, and they're still ruling us, and nobody ever goes back and fixes them. So, it's central planning by dead people. So,
well, we should mention, you are an expert. Not only are you a lawyer of great esteem, but you have written a lot about how government works or doesn't work.
I'm hosting a forum at Columbia University next week with 2 Nobel Prize winners, the legal philosopher in the world. I've got the smartest people in the world on board with me. And what I'm saying, and this is really important to your listeners, is that we cannot repair this system. It is anti-human. The problem with it is that what the parties are arguing about is not the right thing. What they should be arguing about is how do we make it practical? How do we make local communities have more control of their services and more control over their zoning, going to the housing? You know, and how can we make things so that people can get together and work out disagreements instead of hiring lawyers to quibble over words in a 1,000-page manual? We've created this crazy anti-human polarizing system that can't be fixed. It needs to be replaced. And it's happened many times in history when law gets out of control. And trust me, this legal system is out of control.
Okay, so I totally agree with you. I mean, like I said, this is music to my ears. There was a couple of things that came up in my mind. I pretty much agreed with your analysis of what right and left is. I think your analysis of right wanting to deregulate everything is a little bit of a little bit of a caricature of the right, and maybe that's just because I live in California, and maybe California Republicans are different because we're getting.
I liked what he said about the left, so I can.
Yeah,
you got to take what he said about the right and say it's
okay. I've never actually met a guy that actually wants complete deregulation. Like I've really never ever met, except for an occasional like ANCAP anarchist, like in some weird, art display down in Los Angeles. Like
he still thinks all Democrats are democratic socialists. He just doesn't.
Well, see, he says, okay, we got to reboot. And this is what I'm afraid of. I mean, my personal business, I literally feel like I'm working for the U.S. government. I have watched between the Ladder Safety Act, between the changes of the, I won't name my company, but between the changes of all the SBCB legislation and then the AQMB legislation, I have literally watched my quarterly taxes go up and up and up and up in higher and higher and higher proportion to the amount of sometimes not even profit anymore because of the taxation, where and here's Gavin Newsom coming in, saying, oh, we need to regulate more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm mortified here because I literally think we've gotten to a point of literally unsustainability. My family studies a lot of biology. I worked in pest control a lot in college, and when you have to study ecosystems, you really realize that biological ecosystems are very much not different than economic ecosystems. Right. And when a fungal bloom or a toxin starts traveling through an ecosystem, the ecosystem doesn't realize it's dead until it's already too late. And sometimes once these blooms get bigger than 1% to 2% beyond the 0.1% they're supposed to be at, you realize, oh, the whole thing's going to be toxic. So I love how you said, oh, it's immoral that we waste that much money. It would drive me nuts when Bernie Sanders would get up there and say, like, it is immoral that large corporations and the 3% make more than X, Y, or Z, and then I'd look at the tax code, and to be in the top 3%, you only had to make $127,000 a year, which is the amount of money that a school teacher and a principal make if they're a married couple. And I don't really think the school principals and the teachers are what's wrong with American infrastructure.
He still hasn't picked up on the wealth inequality issues, so I just kind of let it settle.
No, I agree with wealth inequality, but what drives wealth inequality is the fact that there's a bunch of socialist, hyper-regulated laws that make it so the small guys can't compete. And the perfect example is me. I went to go become a county vendor, and I went down to the county, and they said, oh, you want to be a county vendor? Great, there's only 2 other people on the list for your type of business. And they handed me a 54-page document in which I had to promise to surrender. People could surrender and abandon babies at my office. I promised that I would take ex-cons if they, wanted an opportunity at the job, even though there wasn't a job placement program in 20 miles. I mean, I literally spent 3 days filling out 54 pages of documentation, and I looked at it and I thought, dude, I'm a college grad with his bachelor's, and my father is a CPA, and it took us 3 days to fill out this form. Like, no wonder there's no other county vendors except for this big multinational corporation that has a legal department that can spend the 3 days because they're on 6-figure incomes doing it. So I take this very, very seriously. The only problem is I don't know, how do we actually pull this off, Philip? Like, how do my listeners actually effectively do something, because we're getting hammered here?
Yeah, well, first of all, your story is absolutely perfect. It drives people nuts. All this baloney, I started to say something else, all this baloney that people have to endure that serves no useful purpose. So here's how it works. It's always worked the same way, and here's one way at least we get there. Throughout history, when you have a legal system that out of control. It becomes like, I grew up in the South, like kudzu. It's this vine that just grows over everything, right? It's just this huge tangle. When it gets that way, you can't go in and
see. I call that vine leftism, but you can call it.
Yeah, okay.
Just remind everybody that the Roman Empire was run by lawyers, and as a profession, you've been around a while.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens? It happens every time. Is someone appoints a small commission and says, just go and rewrite the whole damn thing. That's what the Emperor Justinian did in the 6th century to great effect. That's what Napoleon did with the Napoleonic Code. He got 4 judges to just rewrite all the laws. It's still the civil code that they wrote, which was then debated and approved by the legislature of France, is still the basis for law for half the civilized world. It's what happened in Germany in the 19th century, and it's what happened in this country. Well, it happened in the Revolution, but it also happened with the Uniform Commercial Code in the 1950s, because we had 48 states at that point. They all had different contract laws. Interstate commerce was way too expensive because you had to have a new set of lawyers for every state. So they had a small group of experts, and they put together a Uniform Commercial Code, and it became part of the basis of the post-war boom of the United States. So we need to do that again. The way you do it, because Congress is not going to do anything, although it's collapsing as we watch. I think it's completely lost the allegiance of the American people. So they don't know it yet, but they're the court of Louis XVI. They're fighting away. But
by the way, for all you millennials out there, the court of Louis XVI was an epic failure. Just go Google it, all right? So anyway, keep going, Philip.
So the way you former Senator Tom Coburn is a conservative from Oklahoma. He's also a medical doctor. He came to see me a couple of weeks ago. He read my book. He said, okay, I agree with everything in here except your criticism of the Tea Party, and I'll look past that for a second. And he said, here's what I want to do. You recommend having a recodification commission. I'm in midstream organizing something called a convention of states that's authorized by the Constitution.
Yeah. Yep.
If you get 2/3 of the states together, they can propose and adopt amendments to the Constitution. He said, what amendment can you give me that will enable you, all of us Americans, to try common sense again? I said, the best amendment would be an amendment that gives the governors the right every 15 years to appoint a commission to recodify all the laws of the United States. And so we have written this amendment. I'm working with Tom Coburn and a whole group of people right now to do this. And if we get the support of your listeners and others, go to commongood.org. You can sign up. It's free. We can build the pressure to actually pull the rug out from under this this alien force, this alien bureaucratic force that's taken over Washington.
Okay, so we're going to repeat that really fast. I love originally when you said, okay, well, we need to go in and blow the system up and rebuild. There's the constitutionalist in me that thinks, when you're quoting how France did it, I think France has had about 14 or 15 constitutions in the same time that we've had one, even though it has been, bastardized and has been corrupted. That
did wipe out most of the intellectuals in the government in the process. That worked.
So even though it's been corrupted, I definitely think this has got to be done in a constitutional framework. Now, I love how you're mentioning the Convention of States, because I have seen this more and more over the past 2 or 3 years talked about in a more and more serious manner, which I find heartening. Usually I think these things are political theater. Like, for example, when West Hollywood wanted to secede from the city of Los Angeles, we knew that it wasn't going to pull off the first couple times they wanted to do it. When California literally was trying to put on a ballot in 2016 that me and Mark were joking about seceding from the Union. And I thought, guys, I mean, really, the second we secede, Trump calls us rebels and sends in the army. Like, do we really want to have a civil war at the San Bernardino, Nevada county line?
We typically fund most of the government's military anyway, so it wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah, so I like how you actually put this in a 100% legal, 100% constitutional framework. Do you actually think that there is hope of this convention of states happening, and if it did happen, that your set of rules would get adopted? Because if so, I'm going to mention whatever 7 times is necessary for branding your website and how people sign up and tell them to go.
Yeah, first of all, it's absolutely possible. Secondly, what political scientists say is that change never happens incrementally. It happens in big gulps. So what's happened, the last time we had big change...
Wait. All of this crappy regulation happened line by line and law by law. Hyper-regulation change happened that way. Negative change happens incrementally, right?
Yeah, I guess, but not system change. All this stuff grew out of a system change in the 1960s, where we got the idea that we not only should change our values, which we clearly needed to do, to not be racist and not to pollute and stuff like that, but we also got this idea that we could make government into like an automatic software program. And it was that idea that came out of the 1960s that has now bred this 150 million words of impenetrable bureaucracy, because it's not a management problem, it's a philosophy problem. We don't let anyone make a decision, because that was the philosophy that they made up in the 1960s. And so the time before we had change was the New Deal, the time before was the Progressive Era, the time before was the Civil War. Anyway, so periodically we have these big changes. We're overdue for a change. And the reason we put up with it for so long is because our society is so rich. We could afford all these idiocies. We could afford to buy people off who demanded things that they probably weren't entitled to. We could afford to sustain obsolete, subsidies from the New Deal that were, hadn't been needed for 75 years. We could afford all this stuff. But now the American citizens, it's not because we can't afford it, although we can't, but it's because the American citizens they just hate this system where people go through the day asking themselves, can I prove that what I'm about to do is legally correct?
People I love what you're saying. Keep going. This is amazing.
People don't feel free anymore. They feel that instead of the fresh air of freedom, we've got this stale air of kind of bureaucratic compliance, and it drives people nuts. And so it's going to change. Donald Trump is the first, actually Obama was the first shoe to drop, because he promised change we can believe in. He'd only been in the Senate for 1 year.
Yeah,
He was the freshest face people had seen in years. He was African American. He had all these things that were different, and he was so smart and all this kind of stuff. But it didn't exactly work out. You
have to give a little bit of credit both to himself, and he didn't have some of the experience on his staff that he needed to cross the legislative aisles. But the Republicans bombed the whole thing. They would not work with him and cooperate in any way. What was Mitch McConnell's famous line? We're not going to let anything go through here, not a single thing. We're not going to approve a single bill or suggestion if it comes from the White House. And pretty much that's what he did.
Wait, was that Nancy Pelosi now or Mitch McConnell?
Well, I think there's a little bit of payback occurring, unfortunately.
It is true that the Republicans, probably more than the Democrats, although they're both guilty, Republicans have been really fighting to make the other side lose instead of fighting to make things
Thank you. I love
happen.
But yes.
Is that your honest analysis? And by the way, I totally trust this because you're a lot more inside the Beltway than we are, and we only get to hear propaganda out here outside in the States that Pan Am puts out, like it's the Hunger Games, But in your honest analysis, do you really, really feel? Because I've always felt the decline of America is a completely bipartisan affair. Do you really feel that in the current stage of politics, that the hyper-regulation problem in America that's putting things in gridlock is really a problem with Democrats with Republicans and not Democrats?
No. The regulation, the Democrats made government unmanageable. It was Democrats who created this philosophy of micromanagement. It was Democrats who gave public employees the right of collective bargaining so that you can't run a school and you can't get rid of lousy teachers. And worst of all, you don't have a sense of camaraderie because everybody knows it doesn't matter what you do. When job performance doesn't matter, the the victim is everybody who works in the place because all the energy dissipates. It's like, all the air out of a balloon. So Democrats caused the problem, but those problems, but the Republicans have not been willing to help fix it. We could talk a lot about that. But the bottom line here is that neither party at this point is willing to budge. Both parties are making out like bandits. The Democratic coffers are filling up with people who don't like, Trump, and the
who also
Republicans
checked their tax returns and suddenly found out that it was they were sold a bill of goods when they voted for them.
Yeah, well, this is a really interesting point. 8 million people who voted for Obama turned around and voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Think about that.
And now it's going to go the other way, unfortunately, because they found out the exact same thing occurred.
And so if we don't come up with a coherent governing philosophy about how to make government practical and fair, which is what I'm arguing for in Try Common Sense, if we don't come up with a positive vision that gives back to Americans the ability to actually solve problems, the electoral needle is going to go crazy.
All right, so we're going to take a little brief break and come back with Philip K. Howard, his awesome book called Try Common Sense, and his website, Common Good. Don't touch that dial. This is Problem Solver Politics. It's 7:48.
Healthcare can be difficult if you're underinsured or have Medi-Cal. Samuel Dixon Family Health Center can help. Services are available on a sliding fee schedule. The mission of the Samuel Dixon Family Health Center is to give the Santa Clarita Valley access to affordable, quality primary care. There are 3 locations to serve you: Canyon Country, Newhall, and Valverde. Go to sdfhc.org for more information and to find the location most convenient for you.
Hey guys, this is Cardon Ellis, host of the new show, Problem Solver Politics, an independent political talk show that keeps you up to date and in the latest political happenings, both nationally and here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Now, this isn't your usual partisan political talk show. At Problem Solver Politics, we have both Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians hash out their differences on air as we strive to find solutions to today's challenges. Join us Sundays at 7 p.m. for Problem Solver Politics.
Once heart attack symptoms begin, delaying treatment increases the risk of heart damage, disability, and even death. Time is critical. Leading the Valley with the most advanced digital technology and treatment times that beat national best practice goals, Providence offers emergency coronary angioplasty and stenting performed by highly trained board-certified cardiologists. For more information, call 1-888-HEALING. The road to healing leads to Providence.
I listen to it all day, every day.
Hometown, your hometown station.
All right. Welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. We are live. Sorry, not this is. I was going to say this is FM 98.1 and AM 1220 KHTS. And then I simultaneously was going to say we are in the KHTS studio, but I mixed both, which is a heinous crime in radio. If you ever wonder whether or not we are truly broadcasting live, there's your answer right there. Anyway, I'm your host, Cardon Ellis, with
Mark Murphy, who has seen that tonight we have restored civility to this political conversation with a new idea.
Yeah, we are having an intriguing conversation with Philip K. Howard, the author of Try Common Sense.
Should be mandatory reading for all members of the voting society.
Yeah, this is an incredible conversation we're having right now. So we just got done talking a little bit of infrastructure and kind of how to move forward out of this hyper-regulated kind of gridlock that we have. I like how you said that the average American is frustrated, and I think on both sides, everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
I see them wildly frustrated because there's all these, spotted around the American map. My buddies that are big on gay rights will point to these weird archaic laws where it's like, a partner of a husband can't get some strange, right of ownership of some of his estate or his benefits when his partner dies, and you kind of think, oh my gosh, this is 2019, while simultaneously, here in California, we're strangleholded with laws that require secretaries in offices who never leave the office to be certified against falls from ladders at 30 feet in height for construction companies when they don't even know how to swing a hammer. I mean, there's both sides have these wild sins that they can point to of government that really do lead to, I think, both sides swinging harder left and harder right because they feel they have to pull harder in this massive tug of war. So this is my question for you. I noticed the subtitle of your book basically says, hey, let's eschew the left and right ideologies. And when I have my Republican friends that I meet, oftentimes I'll say, okay, that's cool, you're Republican. Why are you Republican? And they almost always say, okay, because of the limited argument or the limited government argument and the economic freedom and economic prosperity argument. And I look at them and I say, well,
they do believe in trickle down economics. I mean, you got to look at that and say, what's going on?
So does economic science. So I look at them and I say, well, yeah, did you realize, though, that Donald Trump passed the largest spending bill in American history? So if your fiscal conservativeness is what you're about, you should be angry as heck. And do you realize that every single Republican president since the party was formed with Abraham Lincoln has actually grown the size of government? So the two biggest things you're touting, you're not getting delivered on. And then on the other side, my Democrat friends, they'll say, oh, we're the party of compassion and we're huge.
Remember, no Democrats have ever started a war.
Okay,
never mind. Just as long as you don't check history.
Okay, yeah, we can argue that one a different day. But either way, my Democrat friends, I'll look at them, and oftentimes they'll say, why are you a Democrat? And they'll say, oh, oftentimes it's a mixture of gay rights or minority rights. And I'll look at them and I'll say, okay, but do you realize that the first president to actually invite an openly gay couple to the White House and actually treat them as equals was Ronald Reagan, and the Defense of Marriage Act was signed by Clinton. And if minority rights are your thing, you should be loving Donald Trump because the African-American youth unemployment is the lowest it's been since the 20s, and we started recording these things. Both of these sides have no idea what their party's up to. It boggles my mind. So, how do we come out of it?
Yeah. I don't think people – my argue that in Try Common Sense that they're really not arguing about the right thing. I mean, there's a point of what to all you were just saying. But fundamentally, most people, and studies show this, just want to be able to roll up their sleeve and get things done. So you can have regulatory oversight for a safe workplace or a nice nursing home without 1,000-page rule books. So I'll give you an example. Australia years ago had 1,000-page rule books for nursing homes. They had terrible nursing homes. Somebody had the bright idea of replacing them with 31 general principles. Have a home-like setting, respect the dignity of the residents, stuff like that. They did it. The experts scoffed. They're going to get away with murder. Within a year, the nursing homes were twice as good. And the experts went in. What happened is when you actually let people who give them simple rules and goals that they can internalize, then they go through the day actually trying to make the place nice instead of with their noses in the rule books. And it works better. And people would have disagreements all the time, but they'd sit in a room and work it out. The regulators were still there, but they weren't giving tickets because your paperwork wasn't in order. They would participate in the conversation. And it worked better. It's just governing isn't this hard.
Okay, so
it's just not this hard.
Now, I love what you're saying. Now my question is, I mean, you've advised Donald Trump, and you said something kind of funny at the beginning of the interview where you said, oh, I don't support him because I know him. But it kind of seems to me that he's kind of bulldozing through a lot of this regulation and is in a unique position to actually get some of this stuff done. So what's your opinion in regards to Trump filling out your goals?
No. Well, first of all, he hasn't, in fact. All he's done, basically, is get rid of the Obama executive orders. And one of the problems with the Trump administration is that they have this view, not completely stupidly, that it's too hard to deal with Congress, so they're not going to change any statutes. And the problem is most of these 150 million words of, legal vines come from statutes, so you've got to change the statutes. So, in fact, Trump is not going to do the deregulation. He just talks a good game. And when he says drain the swamp, I probed this, what he really means is let's deregulate, and there are some things you can deregulate. I mean, I mentioned a bunch of stupid, subsidies or whatever. But by and large, most of the things that drive people nuts are micromanagement regulation as opposed to regulatory oversight. So if you made American citizens vote on whether they wanted environmental protection, it would pass completely. If you make them vote on worker safety, it would pass. But they don't like stupid environmental regulation or stupid worker safety rules. So what I'm trying to do is recreate a human-based regulatory framework where everyone actually has the freedom to make sense of their daily choices.
Okay, so this is great, and I want to know in the last 2 minutes here, like, so what can my listeners do? I love that it seems like you actually got a website and a little bit of a pipeline to do more than just listen to that political talk show that rants about the problems with the president and infrastructure.
Because if you haven't listened, what Philip did do is bring up that he has a methodology to help us try and eliminate or reduce some of these ridiculous processes and regulations that have basically made the government we have today.
So first, go buy the book, Try Common Sense, and then Howard, you got a website where people can sign up. Like tell my listeners how they can actually help affect this change.
Well, the website is commongood.org. This is everything we're talking about is not going to happen unless American citizens actually start talking about it, telling their friends about it, and getting the political leaders to think it's important for them to talk about it. Because Washington is in a world of its own, and if we don't hit it with a 2x4, it's always been the case, it won't change. It was true of the Civil Rights Revolution. It was true of the environmental movement. You have to build a movement. So we're just starting right now, well, it started last year, to build a movement. We have some of the most prominent citizens in the country signed up. We've got the people like Bill Bradley and Al Simpson and, Tom Coburn and all kinds of, I'm going to come out and probably going to visit Jerry Brown, who, by the way, is actually, believe it or not, quite smart on these issues, and now he's no longer in office, so he can perhaps be honest about it. And so we have to build a movement, and that requires people to get involved. They've got to begin to see these idiocies in a different way, which I think Try Common Sense helps. But just sign up. We have, commongood.org. You'll get a lot of information on there. You'll get newsletters, and you'll have your own idea. We're looking for ideas. People can send us the ideas.
Okay, so now in the last 30 seconds, guys, everybody, you've been listening to Philip K. Howard. He wrote an amazing book. You all got to go out and read it. It's called Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of Right and Left. He's a guru on affecting positive change that actually works. And if you don't have time to buy the book today, you do have time to sign up for commongood.org. Philip, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. We hope to have you on the show again sometime. This is Problem Solver Politics. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you guys. It is 7:59. See you next week.